The deed is on the table in front of me, folded once down the middle, the way you fold a thing you intend to keep. The paper is cream-colored, county-issued, with a water stain near the bottom left corner that got there before I ever touched it. Thomas Alcott, it says at the top. Then below, the party of the first part. Then a description of the land. Section 14, Township 9 North, Range 6 West, 412 acres, bounded on the south by Gunnison Creek and on the north by the Hatcher Road. I know every inch of it. I ran the lines myself, 3 years before I ever slept in its barn. My name will come off it tomorrow. I'll ride to Denton in the morning, hand this to the county clerk, Benny Marsh, who'll look at me like I'm off my rocker, and when I come back the ranch will belong to Clara Alcott, widow, and that will be the right thing in the world finally settled. I've been sitting here about an hour. The lamp is low and the rain has started again outside, which is fitting because it was rain that started all of this. Not this rain. That was 3 years ago, a November storm that came off the mountains like it had somewhere to be. I was camped 2 miles east on the Harker lease land, running a survey for the county. 8 days in the field, my instruments wrapped in canvas, my notes in a leather satchel I kept under my bedroll at night to keep the damp out. I had a good horse then, a roan mare named Packet who didn't spook at thunder. That was about all I had going for me that night. The storm hit around 4 in the afternoon. Not a slow build, just dark sky, then darker, then the first crack of lightning close enough that I felt it in my back teeth. I broke camp in under 10 minutes, which is fast for a man alone, left the survey stakes where they were, lashed the transit case to the saddle, got the satchel under my coat and rode. I didn't know the Alcott place was there. That's the honest truth of it. I'd run surveys all over this basin for 11 years, and I'd never had reason to go up that particular draw. The county maps showed it as registered land, the Alcott parcel, Thomas Alcott, dated 1871. But I'd never met the man, never needed to cross his fence line. It was just a rectangle on paper, like everything else is before you put your boots on it. I came over a low rise in the dark and rain, and there were the lights. Yellow light in 2 windows of a house, and the dark shape of a barn behind it, and smoke coming off the chimney getting knocked sideways by the wind. I stopped Packet, and she was blowing hard and her ears were back, and I thought, all right, I'll knock on the door and explain myself and ask if I can put the horse in their barn until the storm passes. That's all I thought it was going to be. The man who answered the door was not Thomas Alcott. It was a boy, 9 years old, maybe 10, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes that went wide when he saw me standing there in the rain. He didn't say anything, just looked. My name is Harlan Reese, I said. I'm a land surveyor working the basin. I got caught by the storm. Is your father home? The boy's face did something then, not fear, something older. My father died in the spring, he said. I stood there a moment with rain coming off the brim of my hat and the wind trying to get inside my coat. I'm sorry, I said. Is your mother home? She's in the barn, the mare's foaling. I looked past him into the lit room. Another child, smaller, asleep in a chair by the stove. 2 children, no man. All right, I said. I'll go around to the barn then. Ask if I can shelter my horse. The barn was warmer than the house. The smell of it when I pushed the door open, hay and horses, and the copper salt smell of birth already in progress. That smell is still in my head. It doesn't go away. I've slept in 100 barns in 11 years of field work, and I couldn't tell you what any of them smelled like except this one. She was on her knees in the nearest stall. She had a lantern hung on a nail above her, and she was talking low to the mare. Not words I could make out, just sound, the kind of sound you use when you need something living to trust you. The mare was down on her side, and her breathing was rough, and Clara Alcott had both hands inside, and her face was set in a way that had nothing to do with anything except the job in front of her. She didn't look up when I came in. Close the door, she said. I closed it. Either come and help or stand back and be quiet. I came and helped. I am not a man who knows horses the way a horseman knows them. I can ride, I can care for a working animal, I know enough to keep one healthy on a long survey. But I knew what to do when a woman who was clearly competent and clearly needed an extra set of hands told me to hold something. So I held things. I held the lantern when she needed both hands free. I held the mare's head when she needed that. At one point I held Clara's wrist steady when she told me to, and I could feel the tendons working in her arm. The foal came about 20 minutes after I walked in. Not easy and not pretty, but it came. And when it did, when the mare lifted her head and the foal began its first shaking effort to understand what legs were, Clara sat back on her heels and put one forearm on her knee and just breathed for a while. I was still holding the lantern. I didn't know what to do with it. Thank you, she said without looking at me. She was watching the foal. I didn't do much. You did enough, she looked up then. Her face was streaked with sweat and something else, and her hair was coming down on one side, and she looked at me the way you look at a tool that turned out to be useful when you needed it. Not unkind, just straight. You said your name. Harlan Reese. I work for the county, survey work. She nodded once like she was filing it. I'm Clara Alcott, this is my ranch. A pause. You can put your horse in the last stall, there's grain in the bin. Then she turned back to the mare. That was the beginning of it, not a grand beginning. The rain, the barn, the foal wet and folded trying to stand in the lamplight. Clara on her knees, not asking for anything. Me holding a lantern, which was about all I was good for right then. She let me sleep in the barn that night. Gave me a blanket that smelled like cedar. In the morning the storm had moved through and she was already up. I could see lamp light in the kitchen window before the sky went pink, and when I went to the house she had coffee on and two boys, not one, staring at me across the table. The second one had woken up at some point in the night. His name was Will. The older one was James. James was 9. Will was 7. I had coffee. She gave me bread and cold pork, and I ate standing at the counter the way you eat when you're not sure if you've been invited to sit. The creek's up, she said, not looking at me. She was at the stove. Gunnison, if you're working east of here you won't be able to cross until it drops. How long does it usually take? Day. Sometimes 2. I looked out the window. My stakes were still out there in the mud, 2 miles east, getting rained on. The county wasn't going to wait forever, but a flooded creek was a flooded creek. I could stay and be useful, I said, while I wait on the water. She turned and looked at me, the same straight look from the barn, measuring something. The fence on the south pasture blew down in the night, she said. 3 posts. I can fix fence. Do you know how? Yes. She held my eyes for another second. The tools are in the barn, she said. James will show you. James showed me where the tools were, and then he stayed. He was a quiet boy, not unfriendly, just watchful. The kind of boy who learns by watching before he asks. He handed me things when I needed them without being asked, which is a skill most grown men don't have. We fixed the 3 fence posts, and then I found a 4th that was rotted at the base, not blown down yet but about to go, and I fixed that one too while James held it plumb. When I was done he looked at the posts, looked at me. My father used to do it different, he said. Different how? He'd notch the rail before he set the post, so the rail sat lower. I looked at the post I just set. He was right that his father's way would have been better. You want to pull it and do it over. He thought about it. No, he said, it'll hold. We walked back to the barn in the thin morning sun, the ground steaming where the frost was coming off. I had mud on my boots up to the ankle. James had mud on his boots up to the knee, which must have happened at some point when I wasn't watching, and he seemed untroubled by it. You going to stay? He asked. The creek's up, I said. Couple days maybe. He nodded. "We could use the help," he said, in a tone that was just factual, not a plea. "There's a lot my mother can't get to by herself." I didn't say anything to that. I didn't have to. That afternoon I looked at the roof of the chicken coop, which Clara mentioned had a soft spot, and I found 3 soft spots instead of 1. I patched them all before the light went. The creek didn't drop for 3 days. By the time it did, I'd fixed the fence, the chicken coop, a hinge on the barn door that had been hanging wrong for long enough that the wood was worn in a groove, and a section of the water trough that had a slow seam leak. I'd also split 2 cords of wood, because the wood pile was low and winter was close, and it was work that needed doing. On the 3rd morning, I woke up in the barn before dawn and lay there looking at the dark and thought, the creek is probably down. I should go. I stayed for breakfast. And then Clara was quiet over her coffee, and I asked if something was wrong, and she said, without drama, "The county is going to take the ranch." She said it the way you say something you've been thinking about for a long time, not the announcement, just the fact of it, finally out loud. I set my cup down. "Tell me." "Thomas Alcott had bought the land in 1871, she said. "Registered it, fenced it, built the house and barn, and broke the soil. Good land, good water, 412 acres, but he'd borrowed against it twice. Once after a bad winter killed 40 head, and once after a sickness took him for most of a summer and the work fell behind. The notes were held by a man in Denton named Garfield. She'd made the payments for a year after Thomas died, barely, but Garfield had called the whole note in October, the full balance, not the monthly payment, citing a clause she didn't know was in the contract. "Did you read the contract?" I said. "No," she said. "I trusted him. Thomas trusted him." She said it flat, no self-pity, just the fact of having made an error and living in the consequence. "He's given me until the 1st of December. Then he'll put it to the county for the debt." I thought about what I knew about Garfield. I'd done a survey for him 2 years back, a parcel east of the river. He was the kind of man who smiled at you and counted his teeth in the mirror. He was also the kind of man who understood perfectly well how to read a contract clause that a grieving widow wouldn't. "How much is the balance?" I said. She told me. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the window. The sun was coming up and it was hitting the frost on the glass and the light was going everywhere. What I knew about money, I had some. 11 years of survey work at county rates, living in the field 9 months out of 12, not spending much because there wasn't much to spend it on. I had a number in my head, sitting in a bank in Denton, that I hadn't touched because there was nothing to touch it for. It was enough, more than enough. "That's a debt I could pay," I said. She looked at me. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I'm saying the number is manageable, and I know men in Denton who know the law, and it's possible what Garfield did with that clause isn't legal. But even if it is, the debt is payable." "Why would you do that?" she said. "Because you need it done," I said. It was the wrong answer. I could see it land wrong. She wasn't a woman who accepted charity, and that wasn't what I was meaning to offer, but it came out sounding like it. She looked at me across the table for a long moment, and then she looked at her coffee cup and her jaw was set. "I can't let you do that," she said. "I'm not offering it as a gift. I'm offering it as..." I stopped. I didn't know how to finish that sentence. As what? I'd known this woman 3 days. I'd slept in her barn. I had no claim on any of this. I looked at my hands on the table. "Let me look at the paperwork first," I said. "Before you say no to anything, let me look at the contract and see what Garfield actually has." She was quiet for a moment. Then she got up and went to a box on the shelf near the door and brought back a folder of papers, set them on the table between us, and sat back down. I read for a long time. The clause was real, but it wasn't clean. It said the full balance becomes due upon the death of the registered title holder. Thomas Alcott was the registered title holder. He was dead. Garfield had waited a year, which was patient for him, and then called it. What the clause didn't say, and what I thought a good lawyer might argue, was whether Clara, as the surviving spouse who had continued making payments, had established a modified agreement through conduct. That's a narrower legal point than it sounds. I knew a man in Denton named Wes Prout who'd handled property disputes for 20 years, and he would know immediately whether it held. I told Clara that. If Prout says there's an argument, I said, Garfield might settle for something less than the full call, and if he won't, if he insists, the balance is still payable and you pay it back to me when you're able. No interest, no clause. I looked at her. I work all over this basin. I can make sure any survey work in your section comes through you for right-of-way access. That's worth money, steady money over time. You'd have the means. She was looking at me. That's a business arrangement, I said, not charity. She was quiet for long enough that James came in from outside and looked at us both and quietly went back out. Why? She said again. Because this is a good ranch, I said. Because your husband built something real here and your boys grew up on it. Because Garfield is a man who reads fine print so other people can't, and that is not something I'm willing to just watch happen if I can do something about it. I was looking at the table when I said it. When I looked up, she was still watching me. Not hard, something else. You fixed my fence, she said. Yes. And my chicken coop. That too. You split 2 cords of wood. The pile was low. She looked at me for a long time. The lamp was between us and the light was yellow and her face was quiet. All right, she said, let's go see Prout. We rode to Denton the next morning, just the 2 of us. James and Will stayed with the neighbor woman down the road, a Mrs. Holt, who had done this before when Clara needed to be away. The ride was an hour and a half and we didn't talk much. The morning was cold and clear, and the basin was laid out below us in the frost. I knew the land. I'd surveyed most of it. I knew where the soil changed, where the water table came up close, where the grass would come green in March, and where it would stay sparse all summer. I knew Section 14, 412 acres, bounded by Gunnison Creek on the south, good water, reliable, spring-fed up in the canyon, better than I knew most things. Prout was in his office above the hardware store on Main Street. He was a small man, thin, with reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he read the contract in about 4 minutes flat and then set it down and took his glasses off his head. The clause is real, he said. I know, I said. But, he said, and put one finger on the contract, your wife continued making payments for 12 months after the death. She's not my wife, I said. Prout looked at me over his glasses. Then he looked at Clara. Mrs. Alcott, he said, you continued making payments. Every month, she said. I have the receipts. And Garfield accepted them. He sent a man to collect them, same as before. Prout put his glasses back on and picked up the contract again. He accepted modified performance, he said, talking to himself now. 12 consecutive payments after the triggering event. A judge might well read that as a waiver of the acceleration clause. He set it down. Or he might not, depends on the judge. And the judge in this county, I said. Prout looked at me. Rowlands, he said, who had a beef with Garfield about a property line 2 summers ago. I didn't say anything, neither did Clara. I would, Prout said carefully, file for relief and see what Garfield offers to settle. Garfield didn't offer much at first. He was angry, which meant he hadn't expected to be challenged, which meant the challenge had some teeth. His lawyer sent a letter. Prout sent one back. 3 weeks passed and then Garfield sent another letter, this one with a number in it that was lower than the full balance. It was still a number I had. I paid it. I paid it with my own money in cash, and Prout drew up the paperwork that said the Alcott Ranch was free of the note, and the debt was transferred informally, no interest on my say-so alone, from the bank to me. Clara signed the paper acknowledging the arrangement. James was there when she signed it, which I don't think she planned. He watched his mother sign, and then he looked at me across the table in Prute's office and nodded. Once, the way he'd nodded at the fence post. "It'll hold," that nod said. What came after that is the part that's harder to put in order. I went back to my survey work. I had to. The county had 3 jobs waiting, and I'd been gone longer than I'd meant to be. I rode out and set my stakes and ran my lines and slept under canvas for 3 weeks and thought about the Alcott Ranch more than I thought about anything else. I went back when I could, not often at first, once to check on the situation, which was what I told myself, once to drop off the paperwork from Prute that Clara needed to file with the county. Once because there was a section running adjacent to the Alcott North line that I needed access to survey, which was true, and she gave me the access, and I stayed for supper, which I hadn't planned. Well, it turned 8 by then. He'd gotten over being shy of me, and now he followed me everywhere when I was on the property, which was harder to navigate because I was not a man who knew children. I'd not had children. I'd been on the road since I was 23, and I did not know the protocol for a small person who asked you questions constantly and wanted to know how the transit worked. I showed him how the transit worked. He stood at the eyepiece for a long time, turning the focus ring, and then he said, "Everything looks far away." "That's what it's for," I said. "Can you see the mountains?" I set the angle. He looked. "Yes," he said, "I can see all of them." He stepped back and looked up at me. "My father couldn't do this," he said. I didn't know what to say to that either. "It's a trade," I said. "You learn it." "Could I learn it?" "If you wanted to." He thought about this, then he went back to the eyepiece. Clara was watching from the porch, I noticed. She didn't say anything, just watching. There was a night in February. I was riding back from a job east of the basin, late, and I cut across the Alcott South pasture because the shortcut saved me 3 miles and I had the right of way. It was cold, not bitter, but cold the way February is, the kind of cold that gets into the joints. And the moon was up and the snow on the ground had crusted over so Packet's hooves made a crunching sound. I saw the light in the barn. It was late past 10 and the light was moving, a lantern being carried, not a lamp left burning. I changed course and rode to the barn and tied Packet outside and went in and found Clara on her knees in the same stall where I'd first found her, but this time with a different animal. The young horse, the one that had been foaled in the storm. He'd gotten himself tangled in a fence wire somewhere and come in with a bad cut on his foreleg, and she was cleaning it out with carbolic, and the horse was not enjoying it. She looked up when I came in. Not surprised to see me, which I noticed. "Hold his head," she said. I held his head. It took about 40 minutes. The cut was deep but clean, the wire had been sharp at least, and she worked it thoroughly the way she worked everything, with the same set of her jaw. When it was done, she sat back and looked at the bandaging and then at me. "You were on your way home," she said. "I was cutting through. You don't have to always stop." "I know," I said. She looked at me. The lantern was between us again, and I thought about the last time the lantern had been between us, back in November, that first night, her with her arms inside the mare and me holding the light. "Harlan," she said. "Clara." She looked at the horse, then back at me. "I need to ask you something," she said. "All right. Why do you keep coming back?" I was quiet for a moment. I'd been asking myself the same thing, technically, for 3 months, with less and less success at convincing myself it was the survey work. "Because I want to," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Is that all?" "No," I said, "but it's where I'd start." She didn't say anything. She was looking at the bandaged leg of the young horse, running her thumb along the edge of the dressing, checking her own work. "My husband," she said, and then stopped. "You don't have to tell me." I want to, she looked up. Thomas was a good man. He worked this land until it killed him. He did everything right and it still killed him. And I watched that and I thought, it doesn't matter how good a man is. The land is indifferent. The weather is indifferent. The men in Denton are indifferent. It doesn't matter how good you are. She looked at me. And then you fixed my fence, she said. I looked at my hands. Not because I asked, she said. Not because you were being paid, because it needed doing and you could do it. She paused. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, I said. I know. She stood up and brushed straw off her knees. I just wanted you to know I noticed. She picked up the lantern, then she stopped. I'll make coffee, she said, if you want to come in. I wanted to come in. What I'm leaving out, because it's not easy to say right, is the part where I understood what I was feeling. I am not a man given to that kind of understanding. 11 years on the road will do that to you, not bitterness, exactly, but a kind of practiced numbness about the parts of life that require you to stay somewhere. I'd been moving since I was 23 and I'd gotten good at it. I'd gotten so good at it that I'd stopped noticing it was a choice. What I noticed, that February night sitting at Clara Alcott's kitchen table with coffee going cold in my hands, and Will asleep on the floor by the stove with his dog and James doing his reading at the other end of the table, was that I did not want to leave. Not that night, not in the spring, not when the survey work took me east for a month, not when it took me north. I kept leaving and I kept thinking about coming back. I kept thinking about the fence and the chicken coop and the hinge on the barn door. I kept thinking about 2 cords of wood stacked tight against the south wall. I kept thinking about her hands, the way they moved when she worked, the way she held a thing she needed to keep. In March I told her. I didn't do it well. I was standing in the kitchen after supper and the boys had gone outside and I was supposed to be heading back to where I'd camped, 3 miles east, and instead I was standing at the kitchen door not leaving, and she was at the counter with her back to me, and I said, I'd like to court you, if you're willing. A long pause. I know you're not looking, I said. I know it's only been a year since Thomas. I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just saying, if you were ever willing, I would like the chance. She didn't turn around for a moment. When she did, her face was something I couldn't read, which was not unusual with Clara. She had a face that told you exactly what she was doing and not much else. You paid off my debt, she said. Yes. You fixed my fence. Yes. You're teaching my son to survey. He asked me to. She looked at me for a long time. I wasn't sure what was coming. I had a fair estimate of it being a no, not a cruel no, just a careful no, the kind a woman gives when she's not yet ready and may not be and wants to be honest about it. I know what you are, she said. What am I? A man who moves, she said. You've been moving for 11 years. You sleep in tents and barns and you don't have a home. You could be anywhere in this basin at any given time. Yes, I said. If I were to consider this, she said carefully, I would need to know that changed. I thought about that. The only home I've had in 11 years, I said, is the direction I was riding when I came over that rise in the dark and saw your lights. She looked at me. Something moved in her face. That, she said, is a ridiculous thing to say. It's true, though. She looked out the window. Her jaw had a particular set when she was thinking, and it was set that way now. All right, she said finally, court me then. What followed was about 4 months of the strangest thing I've done in my life. I am as established a man who knows how to be alone. I know how to pack a camp, run a survey line, read a water table, fix a fence post. I do not know how to court a woman, having never done it properly. I bought her things occasionally, small things, a length of good ribbon, some coffee from the store in Denton that was better than the kind she had, and felt foolish about it each time. I was over at the ranch when the work permitted, and I worked when I was there, and gradually the boys stopped treating me as a visitor. James started telling me about things that needed fixing before I saw them myself, which meant he'd started thinking of me as the man who fixed things, which felt like something. In June, she let me hold her hand. We were walking the south pasture fence line. She was checking it before moving the cattle in, and I reached over and she let me. It sounds small. It was not small. She had hands that were strong and slightly rough, and she kept them at her sides when she walked, and when I reached over and she turned her palm and closed her fingers around mine, it was like the whole basin adjusted. We walked the rest of the fence line like that. In August, on her front porch after supper, she kissed me. I didn't expect it. She'd been quiet all evening. She was often quiet, that was just her. And the boys were in bed, and the stars were out the way they are at altitude in the summer, too many of them and too bright. And I was sitting on the porch step with my hat off, and she was in the chair behind me. And then she was not in the chair. She was at my shoulder, and she put her hand on my jaw and turned my face up, and she kissed me. It was brief. It was also the most serious thing anyone had ever done to me. She went back to her chair. I stayed on the step. "Well," I said. "Yes," she said. We sat there for a while. "I'd like to marry you," I said. "I know," she said. "Ask me in the fall." I asked her in October in the barn, which was where it had started. We were both there for a reason. One of the horses had a loose shoe, and it wasn't planned. I asked her, and she said yes in about the same tone she used when she said, "All right, let's go see Prout." Decisive, like something she'd already worked out. We were married in December in Denton, in the county clerk's office with Prout as witness and James, and Will standing in their good clothes looking serious. Benny Marsh, the clerk, performed it and seemed slightly confused by the whole arrangement, but he got through it. Afterward, James shook my hand. Will hugged me around the middle with both arms and then stepped back and looked embarrassed, and I pretended not to notice. And then we worked. That's the honest version of what the next year was. We worked. The ranch needed it. There were improvements deferred, debts to manage, fencing to expand, and in the spring we put in a kitchen garden that Clara had wanted for years. I was still doing survey work, some of it, the jobs that came through the basin and didn't require me to be gone long. James, who was 11 by then, was beginning to actually understand the transit. He had a methodical mind, and he liked precision, which was genetic from his mother, and I thought there might be a trade there if he wanted it. What I want to say about that year is that I understood, for the first time, what I'd been surveying all those years. Every piece of land I'd ever measured, I'd measured for someone else. This line is yours, this water belongs here, this is where the fence goes, this is what you have. I'd measured the world for other men who had something real, something that stayed put, and I'd driven my stakes and pulled my chains and packed my camp and ridden away, and never once thought about what it would mean to be the man who had the thing instead of the man who measured it. I understood it now. I understood it every morning when I walked out to the barn and saw the light coming up over the east ridge and hitting the Gunnison Creek willows, which were gold in the fall and pale green in the spring, and always moving in whatever wind was running. I understood it when James rode fence with me on Saturdays. I understood it when Will, who had gotten interested in weather for some reason, clouds, fronts, the particular colors of sky before a storm, showed me his notebook where he'd been writing down the temperature every morning for 4 months. I understood it when Clara, in the evening, sat across from me at the table where she'd once sat alone, and there was nothing particular happening, just the two of us and the lamp between us and the sound of the fire. That was enough, more than I'd known to want. So, the deed. What happened is that I looked at the deed one morning in September. This September just passed, and I thought, this is wrong. Not the land, not the ranch, not anything about the life we'd built here, just the name at the top. Harlan Reese, party of the first part. I had put the deed in my name when I paid off Garfield's note because that was how it worked. You pay the debt, you hold the title. Clara had understood that, and I'd understood it, and we'd understood it would change when the arrangement was formalized. But then we'd married and the days went by and I'd looked at the deed and thought, I should do that. And then the days went by. It had been almost 2 years since we married. The ranch wasn't mine. I knew that. I'd always known that. Thomas Alcott had built it and Clara Alcott had held it, and I had been, what? A soaked surveyor in a storm. A man who knew how to hold a lantern and fix a fence post and pay a debt. I'd been useful. That was all I'd started out being. What I was now was something else. I was the man James came to when the north fence needed looking at. I was the man Will wanted to show his weather notebook to. I was the man Clara turned to in the dark, who she'd chosen to turn to, and that was the greatest thing that had happened to me in my life, and I had not done one thing to deserve it except show up wet in a storm and be willing to hold the lantern. The land was hers, it should say so. I went to Prout. I told him what I wanted. He looked at me the way Benny Marsh had looked at me at the wedding, slightly confused, but he drew up the deed transfer. It took about 20 minutes to write. I didn't tell Clara. I know that was the wrong way to do it. She would say so later and she would be right, but I didn't want to discuss it. I didn't want it to be a decision we made together or a thing she could argue me out of. I just wanted it done. I brought the deed home on a Thursday. She was in the kitchen starting supper. I set it on the table. She looked at it, then at me. What is this? Read it. She picked it up. Her eyes moved across the top. I watched her face. Clara Alcott Reese, party of the first part. It had her name on it, her land. She read it twice, set it down. The kitchen was quiet except for the fire. Harlan, she said. It was always yours, I said. I just had it wrong for a while. She looked at the deed, then at me, then at the deed. You idiot, she said, but her voice was not unkind. Probably, I said. She picked up the deed and held it. Her hands, which were always steady, were not quite steady. She looked at the water stain in the bottom left corner. She looked at her name. Then she put it down and came around the table, and she put both arms around me from behind, her face against the back of my neck, and she held on. I put my hands over hers. Neither of us said anything. Outside, the light was going off the mountains and the creek was running, and somewhere in the barn the young horse, the foal from the storm, 3 years old now, a solid gray horse with a dark mane, was moving in his stall. James was coming up the road on his horse. I could hear the hooves on the hard ground. Will would be right behind him. Clara's arms were around me. I thought about the number of acres I'd measured in 11 years. The number of lines I'd run. The number of mornings I'd woken up in a tent or a barn or a rented room and put my boots on and gone out to measure someone else's piece of the world. 412 acres, bounded on the south by Gunnison Creek. I'd known the shape of it before I knew her name. I took the deed to Benny Marsh in the morning. He looked at it, looked at me, pushed his glasses up. You're giving away your ranch, he said. Filing a correction, I said. He looked at me for a moment longer, then he stamped it. I rode home.